Good evening, everyone. I'm not Ken. I'm Rick Eyre, and I'm on the committee of Climate Action Burwood-Canada Bay. Ken, who is our president, who usually hosts this meeting, is having some tech difficulty tonight, so I'm substituting for him. Um, Firstly, I'd just like to acknowledge that we are all coming together on unceded land, unceded First Nations land. I'm on the land of the Wangal people of the Eora Nation, and pay respects to First Nations people past, present, and emerging, and a special welcome to any First Nations people who are watching this video either live or on recording later. Our guest speaker is Fiona Lee, known to friends and colleagues as Fee. She's Lock the Gates, New South Wales coal campaigner. If you don't know about Lock the Gates, it's a national grassroots organisation with 120,000 supporters. That's quite impressive. And 260 local groups that campaigns against coal and gas projects. It's formed in 2010 following meetings of landholders, organisations and communities concerned about the rapid expansion of coal and coal seam gas mining in New South Wales and Queensland. Lock the Gate believes that landowners should have the right to block such projects. In other words, that they should be able to block their gates against them. As well as working for Lock the Gate, Fee has also been involved with Bushfire Survivors for Climate Action, which is one of the most effective grassroots climate organisations in the country. Tonight, Fee will be talking about the planned HVO coal mine expansion in the Hunter Valley and what we can do to stop it. We've been covering this in Climate Action Burwood-Canada Bay's weekly email, but Fee will be able to give us a lot more information than what we already know. So over to you, Fee.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, I am joining tonight from my mum's spare bedroom on Wabbical land in Newcastle. I live in a little village called Elands, which is on Biripi country. As Rick said, I'm with Lock the Gate. I've been with this organisation for about 6 months. Prior to that, I worked with Bushfire Survivors for Climate Action because I unfortunately lost my home in the bushfire crisis of 2019 and 20. So I am personally very motivated and have been affected by the impacts of climate change. And I'm really driven to try and prevent such damaging projects from having further negative impacts on our communities and our families and our friends. I have a presentation tonight, so I will share my screen. Now, give me a nod if you can see that.
Yes.
Yes, great. Okay. There's a lot to know about HVO. So I'm just going to set my little timer here to try and avoid going over. So it is the largest coal mine expansion ever proposed in New South Wales. I'm just trying to figure out how to change the slides, but I've got it. So what I hope to discuss tonight is just what is HVO, why is it a threat, a bit about the political context and the ripenings for a win, where is it at in the planning process, and then, of course, what we can do to try and prevent it. Oh, still tricky. Oh.
I found this on the web. What I have to discuss tonight is...
I don't know if you heard that, but my phone just, Siri just activated and was trying to tell me about HVO, which is not incredibly helpful. HVO is short for Hunter Valley Operations. The official name of this massive coal mining expansion is North and South Open Cut Coal Continuation Projects. They are separate projects being assessed together in the planning system. It's on Wanneroo country, and the closest regional centre is Singleton, which is about 24 kilometres away. And as I said, it is the largest coal mining project ever proposed in this state. The two projects straddle the Hunter River, and the HVO has been mining coal in this mine for about 70 years. So it's managed by Glencore, which own 51% of it, but it is a joint project with Yancoal. And the proposal is to mine out until 2050 in the South Pit and 2045 in the North Pit. And they also want to dig out about 400 million tonnes of new thermal coal. So yeah, new thermal coal and soft metallurgical coal, but it's all for export. A little map of where HVO is located. You can see the orange of the north and the green of the south, right there with the Hunter River flowing through them. Yes, it's about 160 k's north of Sydney. And we did, the EPA did confirm last May that indeed it is the biggest project ever proposed in New South Wales, and as Lock the Gate likes to call it, a bloody great mongrel of a coal mine. Some of you may see the mining operations on the Hunter Valley bus tour recently, but if you didn't, this is the view of the North Pit currently. But of course, HVO isn't the only coal mine expansion in New South Wales at the moment. There's about 18, and that number has doubled since Labor got into power at the last election. What we're finding is that coal mines are banking approvals for projects that might not begin until 2030 in this time before legislation and regulations are too tight to prevent approvals. So those things are tightening, which is why we're seeing a conga line of coal mine expansions come through the planning system at the moment. And you can see a map to the right of what we're looking at. These projects would equal about, their life cycle emissions about 17 times New South Wales total annual emissions. It's a climate bomb. If approved, it would have massive climate impacts. We're looking at about 1.2 billion tonnes of life cycle emissions, and that includes downstream emissions equivalent to more than 8 times New South Wales' current annual emissions. And then there's a whole bunch of on-site emissions from fugitive methane and diesel. That's about 29 million tonnes. And of course, they would count towards New South Wales' carbon budget. Obviously, this contradicts the Paris Agreement and also the recently legislated Climate Change Net Zero Future Act. On the EPA, they are sort of beginning to apply pressure, which is great. As you know, with Bushfire Survivors for Climate Action, we took them to court because they weren't considering carbon as a pollution they needed to regulate. Since then, they are being more courageous in their advice on such projects. And in May, we saw them say that this project will cause other parts of the economy to reduce their emissions faster, like in order to compensate it. So there's clearly no room in New South Wales emissions budget for this. And then there's 3 other quotes underneath there, also from the advice, saying the government doesn't have a framework to support that kind of buffering and shifting the burden of decarbonisation from one sector to another. And there aren't really policies and programs to do that, and that the project also relies on offsets with limited information of where they'll be generated. I probably don't need to tell you heaps about methane, but I've included it here because I know that your group works, on electrification, getting out of gas on homes, and would know very well that methane is a potent greenhouse gas that has, worse effects in the short term for the climate, and that it leaks profusely from coal mines. You'd probably also be aware that Australia joined the Global Methane Pledge a couple of years ago to cut methane emissions by at least 30% by 2030. And that also the IEA, the International Energy Agency, says that cutting methane emissions from fossil fuels by 75% by 2030 is really what we need to keep warming to 1.5. And unfortunately, what we're seeing with this proposal is that instead of cutting their emissions by 75%, HVO wants to more than double them by 2030. Those emissions are going to be highest in about, or from 2040 onwards, so about 2045, at which point HVO's emissions would be 5 times the level that they are this year. You know, exactly at the point where they need to be drastically reduced. And this has prompted the EPA to also say in that recent advice that I mentioned that mining beyond 2040 is problematic, and that, you know, significant emissions are going to be generated from those deeper coal reserves that they're mining that would be mining in 2040. They stopped short of recommending the project be rejected. So actually what I fear might happen is there might be an approval, but on the condition that mining stops at 2040 to eliminate the problem of those fugitive emissions post 2040. I hope that doesn't happen. And the final point on methane is that Glencore have ruled out any pre-drainage for about 20 years. You know, that's where they suck the methane out to flare or use for other purposes. So of course, there's biodiversity impacts that come along with this project, as well as climate ones, particularly in relation to the central Hunter Valley eucalypt forest and woodland, CEEC. That's already been, you know, significantly impacted by coal mining in the region in the last decade. About 2,000 hectares of it has been lost. And that woodland is home to beautiful and endangered species like the regent honeyeater, the swift parrot, and the grey-headed flying fox. And the New South Wales Biodiversity Outlook, you know, from the government said that 50% of listed threatened species are expected to survive in 100 years. So that's not a particularly good outcome at all. And of course, that the key driver of that is biodiversity loss, is their habitat. On water, there's quite a bit on water. I'll just check my time. Because the mining operations straddle the Hunter River, they have the access to all that water. The expansion project particularly puts Jerry's Plains at risk, which is a small town sort of to the east of it. The miners also, if approved, would capture like a lot of surface water out of the Hunter catchment, which would really affect downstream users. That's billions of litres of surface water. And of course, they'd be drawing down the alluvial aquifers of the Hunter River and the Wollombi Brook. There's been some toing and froing again with I can't remember if it's the EPA, but regarding this impermeable barrier. They're mining so close, particularly in the Carrington pit, to the river, that they need to build this massive impermeable barrier to prevent the water just flowing right into the mining pit. A water expert, Dr. Ian Wright, wrote in his EPBC referral submission in 2023 that the project's going to have adverse impacts on groundwater, surface water resources and aquatic ecosystems, which we know, and that it consumes a whole lot of water and takes it away from other tributaries and other groundwater resources. And those resources in the Hunter Valley are highly contested. And, you know, with climate change, the supply will become even more uncertain. And on air quality impacts, I'm sure everyone here would know that the Hunter, the upper Hunter, particularly around Singleton and Muswellbrook, already suffer poor air quality due to the existing coal mining. There's a lot of coal mines up there, a lot of coal dust, and that the environmental assessments of coal mines don't accurately address the cumulative impact of, you know, all of the mines together and all of the dust. And rightfully so that Muswellbrook Council is concerned about the air quality getting worse if HVO is approved, and any health impacts would be, of course, extended way out until 2050. It's preposterous to think they're seeking approval when we're supposed to reach net zero emissions. There's an air quality expert called Gabriel De Silva from University of Melbourne, and he has talked about PM 2.5 in his submissions on other coal mines in the Hunter, and saying that there is no safe exposure level for PM 2.5, and yet the Hunter suffers from high levels of PM 2.5 regularly. In regards to Wanneroo cultural heritage, there's about 279 Aboriginal cultural heritage sites around HVO, and the project is going to impact a lot of them. Some are, you know, are moderate and of high significance, scientific significance. And again, talking on the cumulative impacts of coal mining in the Hunter area in regards to water, air quality, it also applies to Aboriginal cultural heritage. And Heritage New South Wales indicated that, saying that, you know, there's already been a loss of about 700 Aboriginal cultural heritage sites in the local area, and that the impact would be quite large if this was approved. Glencore have committed to avoiding some scar trees at the request of some of the registered Aboriginal parties, and rightfully so. There's been other interventions. There's a group called the Plains Clan of the Wanneroo people, and they made a Section 10 application to protect some of the area, but Tanya Plibersek refused it, even though she said that some of these areas are culturally important to the applicants. So that's kind of where the cultural heritage aspect is at the moment. And just briefly on economics, I would encourage you to look at the Australia Institute's submission on the EIS if you'd like to look a bit more at this. But basically, the Australia Institute say that the cost-benefit analysis, it overstates the benefits and understates the cost. I'm not talking about the social cost of carbon even there. The EY, they're a consultancy, their cost-benefit analysis says that Yancoal has company tax benefits of about $1.7 billion. However, they haven't paid tax in Australia in the last 9 years. And then the Australia Institute go on to say that due to the uncertain future of the coal market, it means that the financial benefits are probably overstated, and the external costs, which is something so deeply important to me, including the impacts of climate change, they're much more certain, and that the USA EPA estimates would outweigh any benefits to the project. Yeah, this is something that is very personal to me when I hear about coal mines talking about economic benefits, when people like me, my family, and my friends have already suffered so much, personally, financially, emotionally, and we're only a handful of people that have already been affected by climate change. So now that we've heard all about what's happening with the HVO, let's take a little look at what we like to call the ripening conditions for a win, which is a bit about like the political context in New South Wales. You would know that last year the Labor government legislated their Climate Change Net Zero Future Act, and under that act they have established the Net Zero Commission, The Net Zero Commission is responsible to the government. There's a joint standing committee that they report to. And the Net Zero Commission can provide advice to the Independent Planning Commission. They're responsible for setting interim greenhouse gas targets. And hopefully the Commission will be able to put together their first report before HVO is referred to the Independent Planning Commission, so that the decision maker on this project, the Independent Planning Commission, can have the report, which would hopefully, I mean, I don't know, I can't tell what it might say, but it is the Net Zero Commission's job to ensure that we meet the targets and that we're on the path to net zero emissions. And the only logical conclusion should be for them to say that HVO must be rejected for its greenhouse gas emissions. The next point is it's interesting. Recently, Penny Sharp made an announcement that New South Wales is falling short of reaching our 2030 and 2035 emissions reductions targets. And I have this here because it's meant that she has issued letters to various ministers and made public statements that we need to work harder to reach those targets. Yes, because obviously approving HVO would blow them out of the water. As I said, she did write to some key politicians. She wrote to Paul Scully, the planning minister. Paul Scully wrote to the Independent Planning Commission. And that correspondence was about letting them know they needed to consider greenhouse gas pollution and the Net Zero Future Act when making their decisions on this project. So that was a very, very welcome statement by the minister. Also, again, on the EPA, they've said in their advice that because the fugitive methane emissions in 2040 will be so high, that would make up about 3.5% of all emissions produced in New South Wales in 2040. So again, that's not a rejection of this project, but it is additional pressure in regards to climate. And again, there's more pressure on methane given the methane pledge. The Independent Planning Commission is the decision maker in this project, and they have refused controversial projects in the past. There's a list of them there, some of them on climate grounds, including Bylong in 2019. Also, that was about agriculture and water, and historically Rocky Hill in 2017. So they can do it. In regards to the IPC and where this project is at, we just found out this week that the Department of Planning has requested more information from Glencore on greenhouse gases and asked them to respond to the principles of the Net Zero Act, which go into things about the cost of not doing anything on climate, the right to a healthy environment. Oops, sorry. So that is really a really positive development. When Glencore has responded, the Department of Planning, they'll put together their assessment report, and then they give that to the IPC. That assessment report will include its recommendation or whether or not they think it should be approved based on all the information they have before them. So that Paul Scully, the planning minister, the process is that he will refer HVO to the Independent Planning Commission, and he'll decide whether it will be a public hearing or a public meeting. And they sound really similar, but they're actually very different, because a public hearing, which is what New South Wales has always had for doesn't allow community groups to challenge these projects in the Land and Environment Court on their merits, only with a judicial review, which is on like the legal technicalities. So we have been advocating for the planning minister to hold a public meeting so that the community can, have access to merits appeal rights. if we need them. A little bit about what we can do. So the IPC has a large consultation process, and we're really hoping that during that time, thousands of people will object to this project, remembering, of course, it is the largest coal mining project ever proposed in New South Wales history. And I'm looking back to the Narrabri Gas project, where there was 100 people a day for 4 days making verbal submissions during the hearing, and 10,000 written submissions about that project. So I would love to see every single one of us here register to present at the hearing. It's 5 minutes and you read your written submission. You can do that online. There'll probably be a hearing in Singleton, and Lock the Gate thinks that to maximise visual would love to see so many people in Singleton, showing up for that hearing. After that hearing process, the IPC will make a decision. We're thinking that due to the complications with the greenhouse gas stuff, it won't be referred till late this year or early next. But it's not over then. Of course, the Federal Environment Minister needs to approve it. There's a bit about closure dates. And I think I'm going to go over time, sorry. HVO North is approved to operate until June next year. So we're getting very close to when the mine is actually supposed to, on the north side is supposed to close. And the southern side is dependent on the northern side because that's where the coal handling equipment is. So if they don't get the approval, it means the mine will close. And there's a lot of jobs involved here. So I think that Glencore hasn't done a very good job at all in preparing for a rejection and taking care of their workers. They have just assumed they will continue to get approvals for coal mines like this without really giving a thought to their workers. So that's something that we really need to be mindful of, is that impending closure date and the impact it will have on workers. What we've been doing on HVO, there's 3 phases there. We made a social media video to try and raise awareness. We're in phase 2 at the minute, taking actions at key decision makers' offices, which I'll get to in a minute. And then, of course, there's a referral in phase 3, which is not September. It'll be late this year, early next, when the IPC comes around. And this is the final slide. So something you can do tonight, I'll make sure that I put the link in the chat, is watch and share the HVO video explainer. Some of you may have seen it. There's a Glencore character talking to the Premier. It's sort of funny. It goes into Glencore as a company and the impacts of the mine. So I would encourage you to just give it a share on your social media or email it to your friend. And the reason I'm actually in Newcastle tonight, despite living 3 hours north, is because I'm going to meet a lot of other people to deliver our petition to Chris Minns, asking him to stop coal mine expansions. And we'll be doing that by forming a human conga line from 52 Martin Place, where his office is, all the way to Parliament. So you're welcome to join us. I think you're Sydney folks, 8 o'clock tomorrow, 52 Martin Place. It should be a very fun time. But if you can't make it there, we are encouraging people to meet with their Labor MPs to put pressure on them to stop coal expansions. And then, of course, we have the IPC referral, which I've gone through. And after that, before the IPC makes their decision, we don't know what we're going to do yet, but we will continue to apply pressure wherever we can in hope that this massive project is rejected. And that's the end. Thank you. Did I go over time?
No, that's great. No, not rush for time. Thanks so much, Fee. That was fabulous. Told us a lot. And yes, tomorrow morning.
So it's a lot of information.
Yeah. Okay, so yes, tomorrow morning. That's what time was that again?
8 a.m. at 52 Martin Place.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know if anyone on our call is going, but it sounds very interesting. Will be going on tomorrow. All right. We have time for questions. So if anyone has questions, they can put in the chat, or if you're willing to raise your hand and willing to come on screen, then we can do that as well. I know Billy has her hand up, so I'll add her to. And Billy, over to you.
Hi, Fiona. I just wanted to ask in relation to the Commonwealth Government approvals, that would be done via the by Tanya Plibersek's area under the IPBC
EPBC, yeah.
PC Act. Is that the only approval that's needed at Commonwealth level?
Yeah.
Okay, and she's already got it, but she's not going to approve it until after it's passed the IPC at state level.
That's
Is
right.
that right?
Yep.
Oh, there
Yeah. And
was a water trigger under that act, I understand. I wonder, and she, I don't know if you've had a look at that, but those water impacts that you've discussed are pretty cool. And I think she's knocked back the odd project on the basis of that water trigger. Might be worth having a look at that.
yeah, well, we're hoping it won't get through the state level.
So where you're putting your energy into
Yeah.
into it. Yeah, because I was also thinking the methane too. The Commonwealth is Bowen is just setting up a panel to try to, oh, you'd know about that, to try to well, what he says is establish integrity in actually assessing methane emissions and presumably are using them more rigidly in the assessment of greenhouse gas emissions from any particular project. So that's something to watch over time. It'll probably take a couple of years for that to be the case, but that's good news about the impacts of methane. And I'm wondering if there's any health impacts on methane leaking fugitive emissions over time, health and other impacts for the local environment around the coal mine. Do you know about?
Yeah. No, not extensively, but I did talk to someone from Healthy Futures recently who told me that in the immediate sort of vicinity of the mine, I think the methane sinks, and then there's impacts related to that.
Right.
But yeah, I'm not. It's something that we have been seeking more information on, especially ahead of the IPC referral, to make sure that the IPC has all the information before it, to make the right decision there. So yeah, I would look at their website if they might have some more localized impacts of methane.
Yeah. Okay. Just before I hand you over, are you working with the Nature Conservation Council? As you know, they've got an open door to Penny Sharp, although not that always works, but they should be involved with this project at a major level, I would think.
Yeah, I would think so too. We do work with them a bit, definitely, and communicate with them. And they do have a climate sort of campaign.
Yeah. And they've just produced, well, I don't know if it's through their board yet, a new climate change policy and reducing and closing down fossil fuel mines is number one strategy in that policy. This is probably the prime example they would need to have on the dangers new mines. So I think more discussions with them would be a good idea. If not, I'm sure they're happening already, but they need to get their teeth into this.
Is your organisation a member group of NCC?
Yes, we are. There's a climate climate and energy working group,
Mm-hmm.
and member groups can be represented on that. And I would suggest that Lock the Gate get involved with that group.
Mm. Yeah, and it would be good for your organisation as well to take this issue to that group, because
there's some other groups facing mining issues around the state who are on the group. So you've got some fellow travellers.
Yeah, many of us.
Yeah.
Ken.
Yeah, I finally got here.
Welcome.
And then when I got in, I discovered that my microphone and my camera were not working. And I've spent about 20 minutes trying to make them work. And guess what? I discovered that the lead had pulled out of the computer. So I don't know whether that's got to do with why I couldn't get in the first place. But anyway, very frustrating. Hi, Fiona. I'm afraid I missed much of your talk, fiddling around trying to get Zoom to work. But I do have a couple of questions for you.
Well, hopefully I can answer them for you.
Well, I wish you could. You'd solve a huge problem for us. The polls that have been done by ACF and other groups show that the public is with us on issues of things of emission cuts and renewable energy, but not yet on the issue of fossil fuel exports. That people still see coal and gas as major sources of export income, and governments see them as sources of revenue to pay for, health, education, defence, and so on and so on. And I see this all the time when I go around talking to mainstream groups like Rotary and Lions clubs and U3A, Probus groups, and so on. How do we change public opinion on this issue so that we actually can put real pressure on governments into phasing out fossil fuels? Because until we solve this problem, and we can argue it, we argue the emissions as a domestic issue largely on economic grounds now. We just say it's cheaper. And it's a very easy case to make. We don't have to argue it on moral grounds or environmental grounds or scientific grounds. But those arguments just don't wash with huge numbers of people out there in the public, because they always say, yes, but how are we going to pay for this, and where are we going to replace the jobs and the income? How do we win this argument?
Well, it doesn't help that Chris Minns and all of his, many of his Labor MPs are, repeating figures like a $50 billion hole in the budget. I think he said that just a few weeks ago. So that's why we're encouraging people to meet with their Labor MPs, economic diversification and other things, because it's coming from the top. That's something that Minns keeps repeating, the reason why we need coal for export. So I guess that's why we are focusing a lot on Minns at the moment too.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find arguments that really will cut through with people. And I guess this is the main reasons why we all have electrification, because it's an easier argument to make. My own feeling is that the more we make that argument, the easier it is to make people on the big question, get them interested in the first place. It's very, very frustrating, particularly when you hear Labor MPs mouthing all this stuff.
We always look at taxing the profits of those companies to support the transition, which isn't happening at the moment. Is happening a little bit, but they could be taxed a lot higher for the damage that they're causing, and to support their workers. So and I don't think the public has a problem with making giant multinational corporations pay.
I know. I think that argument would work in terms of getting people, to support taxation. But is that argument going to make it, make them more likely to want to put an end to fossil fuel exports, or do it the opposite and say, oh well, we're getting more money from those exports, so therefore they're a good thing?
Chicken or the egg, it could go either way. Like maybe it's a two-step process. So we tax them and then we put them out of business.
The other question I had was, I mean, how much support do you think there is in regional communities for the things that Lock the Gates pushing for?
Well, we're a national organisation, and we have member groups all over the country, and we work on like a number of different campaigns. So if I was to speak specifically about HVO and regional communities, yeah, it's a tough one. Obviously, a lot of the mine workers live in the Upper Hunter, half an hour from here, and are dependent on the mines. But we have a lot of member groups, in nearby areas that are obviously concerned about the climate impact. So, yeah, it is a tough one, and particularly on HVO because that mine has been there for 70 years. Like I recently went door knocking in Jerry's Plains, and a lot of people were unhappy about the level of dust when we went there, thinking that they would be concerned about the noise because the EPA had even identified that there might be mitigation strategies required for some of those residences. But no, they said dust, and they also all said, well, the mine's been here longer than us, so yeah, they're quite tolerant of it.
Thanks. I think Stephen has a question.
Good evening, everyone. Hi, Fiona.
Hi.
Thanks for the talk. I think talking to quite a lot of politicians, there's a lack of leadership. So in other words, they're waiting for the consumers, the voters to really start to move so that they can lead with the sheep, in other words, rather than the other way around. So I think it's a two-pronged situation where we do talk to politicians, but their main purpose is to be re-elected for the next election, and then get elected first and then be re-elected. So the community needs to understand the importance of what we need to do, getting to renewables and getting off fossil fuel. We just have to do it slowly at a time. But I think once the community is on board, it's actually a solid movement, as opposed to talk to a politician. They may change, they may support the cause, and then they'll be voted out next time, and then we're back to square one again. Yeah. Whilst once a person has a solar panel, they'll always want to get a solar panel if they can. Once they have an EV, they always want to get an EV, and so forth. So that's a slow approach, one-on-one approach. One member talks to another member, and so forth. But it's a solid connection. Once you've owned the product, then it doesn't matter how much misinformation is out there. You're not going to go back.
I think that's why it's so important to celebrate, the climate and environment movement as a whole, because we each play, a different role in how we tackle the issue of climate change. And yeah, one-on-one conversations with our friends in our communities is so vital in building the community support that we need, as is lobbying politicians, for more ambitious regulations and policies. So
Fiona, I haven't come across Stephen before. Yeah. He's the Vice Chair of the Australian Electric Vehicle Association, and one of our most active members.
I think on that front, like councils and like the state government is the intermediate between, citizens and federal, the bigger mechanics of driving change. So if you engage those people, the councils and all that, to foster public events, talks, and like that, in a non-threatening learning environment, then you will get the community on board a lot quicker, as opposed to you and I just talking on Zoom meeting. We're just an echo chamber, and so like these, like the Ashfield one, they just did they just hosted a talk, and I just came along and did a talk, and there were many people who don't know about EVs, for example, and so that's how they get their first foot into the understanding of what NEVI is, of such, so on and so forth. And once they're engaged in the importance of that, then yes, they'll come along to these climate action, activities that we wanted to come along.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree. Yeah, but it all needs to happen simultaneously.
Yes.
Yeah. Can I just make a comment in relation?
Mavis has her hand up, so I'll get her to
Sorry.
speak first.
Yeah.
Mavis, you're muted.
Sorry. I wanted to bring up, when I saw the map with the extent of the land that could possibly be going all under coal mining, I was wondering, first of all, how much of this land is either food producing or grazing, or, anyway, something that is producing goods and services and useful things for people at the moment. And I wondered if any farmers groups have spoken up and what their considerations are for the total land change that it would be.
I believe that the expansion of the mine is into land that Glencore and Yancoal already own. So wouldn't necessarily put farmers out of business. But if we look at the total amount of land that is covered by mining leases in the Hunter Valley, it is significant. It is huge. And there have been a number of local groups that have, spoken out against that, including people from, the equine industry. And various individual farmers in the local area. But I guess what's, another sort of take on that is that with the closure of coal mines, in the coming decades in the Hunter, what is that land, going to look like, and will the mining companies restore it, and then will it be, revegetated, rehabilitated, and returned as habitat or farmland? That's going to be a huge issue in the coming decades in the Hunter Valley.
That's never happened to now, has it? The rehabilitation has never happened up till now.
Not really. They do, a little bit at a time,
Okay, Ken has his hand up again.
Yeah, I've got another question. How do we best counter the campaign against renewables that's happening in regional communities? I mean, because I'm part of the letter writing group called Paper Pixies, I read the Murdoch Press every morning, and it is a mighty depressing activity to have to do every day. The Australian is just running a relentless campaign against renewable energy, much worse than the Daily Telegraph. The Telegraph's more interested in football and gossip, and it does occasionally, it puts in a few bits and pieces, but the Australian is just awful. And you can really see that they are waging war to try to stop us from saving the planet, basically. How do we, we write letters about this, but that's not getting it out to the rural communities where we really need to do something about it. What's the answer to this? You may not have an answer, and it may not be your area, but anything you could say that we could use as an argument in writing to the papers, because there are several of us here tonight who write letters regularly and get them published in the papers.
Look, our organisation is having a national conversation about that tomorrow, actually, because we recognise, how important that issue is, and how, perhaps well-placed or not we might be to respond to that, given we have so many groups across this continent in regional areas. It's a massive question, one so many organisations are grappling with at the moment. I certainly don't have the answer to that. I'm sorry, but I can let you know what we might come up with, and certainly give you information when I come across it.
Farmer X might be in favour of having a wind turbine on his or her property. Then Farmer Y, who lives next door, doesn't have the turbine on the property and is jealous and angry and says, I have to put up with the turbine right next door, but I don't get any of the economic benefits from the turbine. I don't know how you deal with this. And there'll probably be more farmers who don't have turbines than ones who do, so more that are not benefiting from it. And therefore easier for Barnaby Joyce to whip up anger amongst those people.
I think that because of the delay, the decade-long delay of the coalition government and then Labor coming in federally, and trying to move pretty quickly on the rollout to renewables, that perhaps the consultation in regional communities could have been a lot better, and to try and prevent this from happening. And that's why there's been a push for these local energy hubs. Have you heard about them? In regional towns, where like a one-stop shop where people can go to get correct information and ask questions on the rollout of renewable in their area. So I just think more information for people in regional areas is a really good thing, and deep consultation around those issues. And that takes time, yes, and we're in the critical decade for climate action. But it does have a big impact on regional people who often feel like they're taking the burden for urban people, and how that might be unjust. So I think the local energy hubs that we're supporting, for that reason. But in terms of how you communicate with regional people and renewables, it's many and varied, hopefully. But I'll let you know.
Okay.
Okay, we're getting close to 7:30. So, any last questions?
Could I just make a comment, or perhaps it's a question to you, Fiona? When we hear often that governments are going to a pension or whatever, we hear that it's favoured by the local community because their jobs are intact. And I know that there's moves to develop new industries and so forth, but we need to ramp that up too, and to also get that information out. I know I've heard that in Lithgow there's now, the people are proposing, and that doesn't mean it's going to happen, but that Lithgow become the centre for building trains, electric trains, and so forth again. And if there was tangible proposals around this mine, around the Singleton area, it seems to me that the local communities would react more strongly, and the local governments and the politicians in those areas would have an answer to people. They're not so much interested in greenhouse gas emissions or climate change even. It's the jobs and the loss of those.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It's going to be a tough time for people that work in the coal sector. There's no doubt about that, and that's why I truly believe that, like giant international corporations like Glencore that have a closure date of a massive mine, in June next year, and no plan to deal with their 1,500 workers in case they don't get approval, they have a responsibility. They talk about, the contributions they make to the community all the time, but yet they're not accountable for their workers, in this situation. And
I guess I want to know, is Lock the Gate talking to local governments and also to industry associations, Chamber of Commerce's or whatever in those areas to help them develop ideas for alternative industrial processes or that could be sold somehow and subsidised by government to get started, perhaps. That would solve, to my mind, that would make a huge difference.
Yeah, I think there are other organisations that are better suited to that, to be honest, like Beyond Zero Emissions and Hunter Jobs Alliance. They have clear visions for the hunter about, you know, TAFE reskilling and what energy might be, you know, suitable for what locations. We work more directly with community members and trying to protect their properties and farms, and you know, with our member groups in urban areas with concerns around climate. But yeah, there is work being done in that. But yeah, we're not doing it specifically.
Okay. I just had that example of the Lithgow Environment Centre, which is now pushing for a train building industry, and talking to the politicians and to this industry.
Yeah. Yeah, we definitely support the people doing that amazing work, though. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.